So imagine dedicating like your entire life to this massive, unprecedented rescue mission.
Right, a really huge undertaking.
Yeah, exactly. You build this whole philanthropic empire, you pour every single ounce of your physical and emotional energy into the work, and you successfully save millions of lives from absolute ruin.
Which is the ultimate goal.
Right. And at the end of it all, when you are standing there, exhausted but fulfilled, the universe just taps you on the shoulder and says, hey, you actually saved no one, and you did absolutely nothing.
Oh, man, that is brutal.
Right. Would you feel cheated? I mean, would you feel like the fundamental contract of your life had just been totally violated?
I think most people would be completely devastated by that.
Absolutely. Well, today we are staring down what is probably the most mind-bending paradox of the Diamond Sutra. This is a text that just actively dismantles the entire psychological ledger we all use to measure our self-worth.
It really is a profound shock to the system, honestly, because we are so totally conditioned to operate on this transactional basis.
Oh, 100%.
You put in the moral effort and you expect the moral credit. But Mahayana Buddhism, and specifically the sections of the Diamond Sutra we are analyzing today, it looks at that ledger of merit and essentially just burns it to ash.
Which is wild. And welcome back, by the way, to the third installment in our special deep dive series into the Diamond Sutra.
So glad to be back for this one.
Yeah, we are diving really deep into the architecture of the human ego today, focusing specifically on sections 3 to 5 of the text. So we are looking at the Bodhisattva's ambition and this core doctrine of non-self, or anatta.
And to help us decipher a text that, let's be honest, seems to just delight in philosophical contradictions.
Oh, it really does.
We are pulling from a really fascinating stack of sources for you today.
Yes, we have the classical brilliance of Master Sengzao from the 5th century, the incredibly razor-sharp modern commentary of Master Nan Huai-Chin, and then we are grounding all of this ancient theory in the practical realities of John Kabat-Zinn and Thich Nhat Hanh.
Because the through line here is undeniably practical. I mean, the text might sound super esoteric when it talks about saving infinite beings, but the underlying mechanics are addressing the exact same cognitive traps we all face.
Like having a total panic attack before a board meeting.
Exactly that. Or experiencing crushing anxiety when you are just looking in the mirror. It is the exact same mechanism.
Okay, let's unpack this because we have a lot of ground to cover. Let's just jump straight into the deep end with the Bodhisattva's vow, because the sheer scale of it is what sets up the whole paradox.
The scale is massive.
Yeah, we aren't just talking about, like, being a good neighbor here. The text describes a vow to bring absolutely all living beings into a state of final absolute nirvana.
Right, the complete extinction of suffering.
Exactly. And the sutra is highly systematic about this. It doesn't just say, everyone. It explicitly categorizes all life. It says beings born from eggs, born from wombs, born from moisture, and born from transformation.
And that ancient taxonomy is crucial to understand, actually, because it illustrates just the uncompromising scope of the ambition.
I mean, moisture-born. That one always gets me.
Yeah, well, the text uses the scientific understanding of its time to ensure literally no localized form of existence is left out. So you have the egg-born, like birds and reptiles.
That makes sense.
Womb-born, which encompasses mammals and us, humans. Moisture-born, which was their ancient understanding of how insects or microbes and certain invertebrates propagated in damp environments.
Okay, so covering the microscopic level, too.
Exactly. And finally, transformation-born, which refers to celestial, ethereal, or formless beings. So the Bodhisattva is basically drawing a huge circle around the entirety of the cosmos, from the microscopic to the metaphysical, and saying, I take ultimate responsibility for the liberation of all of this.
All of it. Which is breathtaking, honestly, this cosmic level of compassion. But then, literally right after establishing this, the Buddha drops the anvil.
He really does.
He states that after all these countless infinite beings have been led to the extinction of suffering, no living being whatsoever has been brought to extinction.
It sounds like a riddle.
It sounds like a total contradiction. The vow demands you save everyone, and the ultimate truth demands you realize you save no one. I have to play the skeptic here for a second.
Go for it.
If I'm an entrepreneur,
right,
and I'm dedicating my life to building a climate tech company to save humanity from ecological collapse.
Right.
And I'm told that at the fundamental level of reality, I did nothing. Why shouldn't I just quit?
Right.
I mean, isn't that a recipe for ultimate apathy? It sounds deeply demotivating.
Yeah, and that is the natural friction of encountering non-dual philosophy with a dualistic mind.
Mm.
It feels demotivating because our motivation is almost always tethered to our ego.
We need the credit.
Exactly. We think we need the identity of the savior or the hero to fuel the action. But the Diamond Sutra isn't asking you to abandon the action of saving the climate. It is demanding you assassinate the ego that takes credit for the action.
Okay, assassinate the ego. That is a strong phrase.
Well, Thich Nhat Hanh breaks down the hidden toxicity of this savior complex so beautifully in his commentary. He actually asks his students to visualize working on a rural development project in an impoverished area.
Oh, I can already see where this is going.
Yeah.
It's the whole dynamic between the enlightened, wealthy benefactor and the helpless victim.
Precisely the trap, yeah. Thich Nhat Hanh points out that if you enter that village holding on to the rigid concept that I am the developed, benevolent giver and you are the impoverished, pitiable receiver.
Then you aren't really helping them, are you?
No, you are not actually practicing pure compassion at all. You are just fortifying your own ego.
Yeah.
You are using their poverty as a contrasting backdrop to paint a beautiful portrait of your own moral superiority.
Wow. So the charity essentially becomes this subtle form of exploitation. You are harvesting their suffering just to build your own spiritual resume.
That is the exact mechanism. By maintaining that separation, you reinforce a hierarchy. True compassion, in the framework of the Diamond Sutra, operates with complete non-attachment.
Meaning what exactly in practice?
Meaning you dig the well because the village needs water, not because you need to be the person who dug the well.
Oh, I love that.
Right. The Bodhisattva doesn't see beings as these solid, unchanging entities that need to be rescued by their solid, unchanging self. They act out of an awareness of total interconnectedness.
Let's stress test that with a biological analogy because I'm trying to picture this action without identity.
Okay, let's hear it.
It sounds kind of like the function of a white blood cell fighting an infection in the body.
Oh, that is a great way to look at it.
Because the white blood cell doesn't possess a psychological narrative, right?
Right.
It doesn't swim through the bloodstream thinking, oh, I am the great defender of this organism. Look at how noble I am for attacking this pathogen.
Right, it doesn't want to meddle.
No, it just attacks the pathogen.
Hmm.
It acts perfectly and ruthlessly to save the system, purely because it is inextricably linked to the system. It operates on chemical signaling, on dependent origination, not on a hero complex.
That is a phenomenal conceptual map for the Bodhisattva's mindset, actually, because the white blood cell doesn't differentiate between me and the body.
Yeah, it's just one thing.
It is a localized action of the whole. So when the sutra says no one has been saved, it's because the Bodhisattva realizes there was never a separate I to do the saving and no separate them to be saved. There is only the localized action of healing within this vast interconnected web.
Which brings us to the psychological root of why we find that so incredibly difficult.
I
mean, why do we so desperately crave the ledger? Why do we need the narrative of the hero?
Because of the cage.
Right, the invisible cognitive cage that we are all born into. The sources point to this, and the sutra identifies it as the 4 marks.
Yes. In classical Chinese, it's called Si Sheng. The Buddha warns Subhuti that if a practitioner holds onto the mark of self, the mark of person, the mark of sentient being, or the mark of lifespan, they are hopelessly trapped.
They cannot be a bodhisattva.
Exactly. And it's important to note that these 4 marks are not 4 totally different things. They are really an escalating progression of a single fundamental illusion.
Okay, let's deconstruct the architecture of this cage for you, starting with the foundation, which is the mark of self, or Lumian Shan.
Right. So the mark of self is this bedrock delusion that there is a permanent, unchanging, independent controller sitting somewhere behind your eyes.
The little pilot in the brain.
Yes. It is the belief in a homunculus, a soul, a solid I, that exists completely separately from the flowing river of physical and mental aggregates.
And once I conceptualize this rigid I have immediately created a vulnerability. Because I have created a border that now needs to be defended at all costs.
And fed and validated.
Yeah.
The moment you define a self, you generate gravity. Things are now either pulled toward the self in the form of greed and desire, or they're pushed away from the self in the form of hatred and aversion.
You become completely obsessed with gain and loss.
Yeah.
Honor and disgrace.
Exactly. The mark of self is basically the localized gravitational center of all human suffering.
Which inherently necessitates the second bar of the cage, right?
Yeah.
The mark of person, Ren Xiang. Because you can't have an inside without defining an outside.
That's it exactly. The mark of person is the inevitable creation of the other. The very moment I draw a conceptual circle and declare, this is me, everything outside of that perimeter instantly becomes not me.
And that's the birth of all interpersonal friction. The second I perceive you as fundamentally separate from me, we are in a potential zero-sum game.
We are suddenly competitors for resources.
Right. And if we look at the modern workplace, this is the exact source of cutthroat corporate stress. The agonizing over a promotion isn't just about the money.
No, rarely is it just about the money.
It's the mark of self. My title, my status going to war with the mark of person, my rival, the colleague I need to defeat to secure my narrative.
You are looking at your colleagues through the arrow slits of your own psychological fortress.
That is a terrifying way to live.
It is exhausting. And then the Sutra scales this up to the third mark, which is the mark of sentient being, Zongsheng Sheng.
So how does that differ from the mark of person?
It is essentially the spatial expansion of that us versus them mentality. It is the human tendency to look at the continuous, fluid reality of nature and just slice it up into rigid categories, tribes, species, and classes.
So it's the ultimate categorization engine.
Exactly.
We stop seeing life and start seeing labels, like my political party versus your political party, humanity versus the environment.
Yes, it is the delusion of plurality. You are seeing a crowded room of separate competing entities rather than a single field of interacting conditions.
And then finally we hit the fourth mark, which is arguably the most insidious one because it deals with time rather than space, the mark of lifespan. Shows Xiang,
The temporal trap.
the demand for permanence.
That's exactly what it is. While the first three marks map out our spatial isolation, the mark of lifespan maps out our temporal grasping. It is the ego's absolute terror of its own impermanence.
The fear of death.
Yes, the fear of death, the desperate craving for longevity, and this continuous attempt to basically freeze time so that the self can endure indefinitely.
Oh, man. I see this playing out every single day in the multi-billion-dollar anti-aging industry.
Oh, totally.
The fear panic we feel over a new wrinkle or a gray hair. We spend endless capital trying to biochemically preserve the ego.
And it never works?
Never. That appearance anxiety is such a lethal combination of the mark of person comparing my physical vessel to yours and the mark of lifespan, the absolute refusal to accept that my physical form is a temporary degrading aggregate.
We are fighting a war against entropy, armed only with cosmetics and anxiety.
That is so bleak, but so true.
It is. And what is truly fascinating, and what Master Nan Huaichen points out with devastating humor in his commentary, is how these four marks so easily hijack our attempts to escape them.
Wait, how so?
We think we are being spiritual, right? But we are often just applying the mark of lifespan to a completely different dimension.
This is where Nan Huaichen is so brilliant. He looks at the religious practitioners, the people meditating, chanting sutras, doing charity, and he calls them out for doing a zero capital business with the universe.
I love that phrase so much. It's a hilarious and piercing critique because he observes that countless people engage in Buddhist practices purely out of a desire for extreme longevity.
Or to secure a VIP ticket to a Pure Land or a heavenly afterlife.
Exactly. They put in a little bit of chanting, a tiny bit of moral capital, and they demand infinite, eternal returns from the universe.
They aren't trying to dissolve the ego at all. They are trying to negotiate a better, longer contract for it.
Right. They want the self to survive the death of the body and go live in a celestial mansion forever.
Which is the ultimate mark of lifespan. It's just the ego dressed up in monk's robes.
The ego is a master shapeshifter. If it can't find validation in material wealth, it will happily find it in spiritual attainment.
So, if the solution to all this suffering is the complete dismantling of the self and the realization of emptiness, I have to introduce the most dangerous counterargument here.
Let's do it.
If I truly internalize that I do not exist as an independent entity, that all my boundaries are illusions, and that the universe is fundamentally empty, don't I just become a nihilist?
That is the big fear.
Right. Because if nothing has inherent existence, what is the point of art or love or morality? Doesn't this philosophy just lead to a dark, depressive void?
That is the most common and historically the most catastrophic misunderstanding of Mahayana philosophy, is the confusion between emptiness and nothingness.
Which are very different things.
Completely different. To truly untangle this, we have to look at the work of Master Xingzao in the 4th and 5th centuries.
Xingzao, he was the prodigy student of Kumarajiva, right? The great translator who brought these texts to China.
Yes, exactly. Kumarajiva directed a massive state-sponsored translation bureau in Chang'an, and he famously praised Xingzao as the first among the Chinese to understand emptiness.
High praise.
Extremely high. And the reason Xingzao had to be so sharp is because of the cultural and intellectual backdrop of his time. During the Weijin period, China was going through extreme political chaos.
A lot of societal collapse.
Right. And in response to the collapse of social order, the intelligentsia retreated into a philosophical movement called Zhuangzi, which is often translated as dark learning or profound learning.
This was a neo-Taoist movement, right? They were obsessed with Laozi and Zhuangzi, engaging in what they called Qingtan, or pure conversation.
Yeah, these deep, abstract philosophical debates. And at the absolute center of their philosophy was the Taoist concept of Wu, which translates to nothingness, or the primordial void.
Okay, the void.
They posited that the fundamental nature of reality was a literal dark emptiness from which all the myriad things of the universe magically emerge. So when Buddhist texts talking about sunyata emptiness started flooding into China, the neo-Taoist intellectuals immediately mapped it onto their own concept.
They thought Buddhist emptiness was just Taoist nothingness.
Exactly. It's a classic translation error, not just of language, but of conceptual paradigms. They assumed the Buddha was talking about the cosmic void before the Big Bang.
Ah, I see. Zhao recognized this as a fatal philosophical error, didn't he?
He absolutely did. He wrote a series of treatises, now known as the Shaolin, to fiercely debate the intellectuals of his time. He argued that Buddhist emptiness, Qinxing, is not a void that exists before or outside of things.
It's not some black hole.
No, emptiness is the fundamental nature of the things themselves, right here and now, because of a mechanism called yuanqing kung-dependent origination.
Let's ground that in a tangible mechanism for you listening.
Right.
If we take a flower, a neo-Taoist might say the flower emerged from the primordial void and will return to the void.
Yeah.
How does Zhao describe the flower?
Zhao would say the flower is not a hallucination. It exists, you can smell it, you can touch it. But if you deeply analyze the flower, you will find it is composed entirely of non-flower elements.
Like what?
Like sunlight, soil, the water cycle, the genetic material from a seed, the carbon dioxide exhaled by an animal, the gravitational pull of the earth.
Oh, wow. So if you remove the sun's nuclear fusion, there is no flower.
Right.
If you remove the Earth's atmosphere, no flower.
Therefore, the flower is empty of a separate, independent, inherent flower self. It does not have a localized essence. Its existence is an event, a temporary intersection of infinite cosmic conditions.
That is beautiful.
So emptiness doesn't mean nothingness, it means interconnectedness. It is actually a supreme fullness. Zhao argued that because everything is made of everything else, nothing can claim a fixed, isolated self.
That reframes everything entirely. Nihilism says nothing matters because nothing is real. Zhao was saying everything matters infinitely because everything is connected to everything else.
Exactly. You are part of everything.
But I want to push back on this with a physical reality check.
Yeah.
Conceptually, I accept that my body is a temporary aggregate of conditions. I get it. But if I'm out doing a century ride on my bicycle and I'm 80 miles in and my knee starts to absolutely scream in pain,
Yeah.
or if I'm trying to sit in a Zen meditation retreat and my back feels like it's on fire, if I am empty, why does the pain feel so undeniably, violently real? I mean, you can't philosophical debate your way out of a throbbing joint.
It's a vital pushback, and honestly, the literature doesn't shy away from it at all. Master Nan Kuai-Chen addresses the reality of physical pain directly, specifically in the context of meditation.
What does he say?
He makes a razor-sharp distinction between physical data and psychological narrative. He says that when your legs ache during a long sit, pain is pain, but that you're observing the pain does not hurt.
Okay, I'm struggling with the mechanics of that. The pain is flooding my nervous system. How does the observer not hurt?
We have to look at the second arrow concept.
Right, the Buddha's analogy.
Yes. The first arrow is the physical sensation. Lactic acid building up, nerve endings firing, electrical signals traveling to the brain. That is the physical reality of dependent origination. The conditions of the bicycle ride have produced the sensation. That is real.
Okay, the first arrow is real pain.
But the suffering, the psychological agony, is the second arrow. The suffering is the internal monologue screaming, "Why is my knee failing? I am weak. I'm going to lose the race. My body is betraying me. I can't stand this."
Ah, I see. The physical pain is just raw telemetry data. The suffering is the catastrophic story the ego tells about that data.
Precisely. The mark of self takes the raw physical sensation, claims ownership of it, and wraps it in a narrative of temporal identity, the mark of lifespan.
My whole future's ruined because of this knee.
Right. Master Nan teaches that if you can use mindfulness to separate the observing awareness from the sensation, you change your relationship to the pain entirely.
You start fighting it.
You can observe the throbbing knee with a kind of clinical, almost playful curiosity. You note the sensation of heat is present, the sensation of pressure is present. You feel it fully, but you do not become it.
Ow.
You realize the pain is an empty, temporary phenomenon passing through awareness, not a localized attack on your core identity.
So the Diamond Sutra isn't a manual for becoming a numb, unfeeling robot at all.
Not at all.
It's a manual for experiencing the full spectrum of human life without being adhesive. It's the difference between being a screen that plays a tragic movie versus being a viewer who jumps up and tries to fight the villain on the screen.
That is a perfect analogy. The screen feels the projection completely, but isn't damaged by it.
That is the essence of non-attachment. However, the sutra anticipates that the moment we realize this, we will fall into a new trap.
We always do.
The trap of clinging to the concept of emptiness itself.
Yeah.
And this introduces one of the most famous metaphors in Buddhist thought, which is the raft simile.
The raft, yes. The Buddha tells his disciples that the Dharma, his own teachings, the methods, the sutras, are merely a raft constructed to cross a treacherous river.
Right.
When you are drowning in the turbulent waters of worldly suffering, the raft is your salvation. You cling to it, you paddle with it, you depend on it. But once you successfully navigate to the other shore, the shore of liberation and emptiness, what are you supposed to do?
You leave it there.
Right. You don't pick up that heavy wooden raft, strap it to your back, and carry it around through the forest for the rest of your life just out of gratitude.
The Buddha says, the Dharma must be relinquished. How much more so non-Dharma? It is a breathtakingly radical statement for a religious founder to make. He is instructing his followers to actively deconstruct and abandon his own teachings once they have served their utilitarian purpose.
The raft is provisional.
To understand how to actually operationalize this raft concept, we have to decipher the highly unique logical syntax of the Diamond Sutra. It operates on a dialectical framework that almost prefigures modern deconstructionism. It's often summarized as a three-stage logic.
Yes, the formula that repeats throughout the entire text is A is not A, therefore it is called A.
Sounds like a total riddle.
It sounds like a riddle, but it is actually a highly precise method for destroying conceptual attachment.
Let's break down the syntax of that formula. Let's apply it to our very first topic today, the Bodhisattva's ambition to save beings.
Okay, let's do it. So stage one, which is A, is the thesis. The conventional reality, I am saving beings, this is the raft. You use the noble action of charity to pull yourself out of selfish apathy.
Okay, so far so good.
Stage two is not A, is the antithesis. The ultimate reality of emptiness. I realize there are no independent beings to save and no independent I to save them. This is where you dismantle the four marks. You realize the conventional labels are illusions.
The raft has crossed the river.
Exactly. And stage three, therefore it is called A, is the synthesis, the state of non-abiding. Because I am not attached to the concept of saving beings, I can effortlessly and perfectly engage in the act of saving beings.
Wow, so the logic basically functions as a self-destruct mechanism for the ego.
It really does.
You adopt a noble concept, you realize the concept is ultimately empty, and that realization allows you to engage with the world playfully, purely, without the heavy gravity of identity. You use the raft of spiritual practice to cross the river, but you don't turn spiritual practice into a new mark of self.
Which is the primary pathology of modern mindfulness culture.
Oh my goodness, yes.
The spiritual ego.
The spiritual ego is rampant. Just think about the archetypal modern seeker. They go to a Vipassana retreat, they read some Eckhart Tolle, they start doing yoga. They genuinely experience a reduction in stress, which is great.
It is great, but
Then, almost overnight, the ego co-opts the practice. They return to the city and start looking at everyone in traffic or in the office with this unbearable, condescending pity.
oh, we all know someone like this.
Right. They think, look at all these unconscious, stressed-out sheep chasing money while I am so grounded, so zen, so enlightened.
The ego has simply changed its diet. It stopped feeding on material superiority and started gorging on spiritual superiority. Master Nan Wai-Chin explicitly warns against this. He says that if you hold on to your realization of emptiness, if you are intensely proud of your state of non-attachment, you are still thoroughly trapped in the mark of self.
You're carrying the raft on your back and bragging about how heavy it is.
That's exactly it. If you are attached to being detached, you are still attached.
It makes me think about how deeply addicted we are to the friction of identity. Master Nan pulls a brilliant quote from the classic Chinese novel, Dream of the Red Chamber, to illustrate this human pathology.
Oh, I love this quote.
The line is, aimlessly seeking sorrow and hatred.
It perfectly captures the restless nature of the unexamined mind.
Master Nan explains that human beings are so addicted to the drama of the four marks, we so desperately need the narrative tension of me struggling against the world, that when we finally achieve safety, when we have money and comfort and nothing to legitimately worry about, our ego begins to starve.
And it panics.
Right. And because the ego refuses to dissolve, it will literally manufacture crisis. It will invent things to be furious about, just to feel the boundaries of its own existence.
Yep.
He points out that we will sit in a beautiful garden and genuinely become depressed and angry at the wind for blowing the blossoms off the trees. We demand friction to validate our reality.
We need a dragon to fight, and if there isn't one, we will hallucinate one. So the ultimate challenge of the Diamond Sutra is not how to fight the dragon, but how to stop hallucinating.
How to view that.
How do we live in the world, doing our jobs, interacting with our families, without constantly regenerating this cage of the four marks?
This is where we bring the ancient philosophy crashing into the modern clinical environment. Because, let's be real, we can't all retreat to a cave in the Himalayas to meditate on emptiness. How do we operationalize this in the 21st century? I want to bring in Jon Kabat-Zinn, the founder of MBSR, Mindfulness-Based Stress Reduction.
Kabat-Zinn's work, starting in the late 1970s at the University of Massachusetts Medical Center, is monumental. He essentially performed a cultural translation of the Diamond Sutra.
He stripped away the religious iconography, the Sanskrit terminology, and the dogma.
Exactly. And he distilled the pure psychological mechanism into a clinical protocol for treating chronic pain and stress.
And he identified the core pathology of modern life with a brilliant turn of phrase. He said, "We have devolved from human beings into human doings."
It is a devastatingly accurate diagnosis. We live in a state of perpetual forward-leaning. We are entirely consumed by the endless cascade of tasks, emails, notifications, and future projections.
We are never actually where we are.
No, we are always mentally inhabiting the next item on the to-do list. The human doing is a creature entirely fragmented by the mark of lifespan, endlessly sacrificing the present moment for a hallucinated future.
And Kabat-Zinn's antidote, his clinical definition of mindfulness, is profoundly simple but incredibly difficult to execute. He defines mindfulness as paying attention on purpose, in the present moment, and non-judgmentally.
Let's look at the architecture of that definition because it maps perfectly onto the Diamond Sutra.
Okay.
The sutra's most famous and transformative instruction is, let the mind function without abiding anywhere.
Right.
To not abide means to not set up camp. It means allowing your awareness to flow without getting snagged on attachments or aversions. When Kabat-Zinn specifies paying attention non-judgmentally, he is providing the exact operational manual for non-abiding.
Because judgment is the mechanism of the four marks.
Yes. Judgment says, I like this, I want more of it, or I hate this, get it away from me, or this makes me look good, this makes me look bad.
Non-judgmental awareness means you experience the data of the present moment without overlaying the ego's narrative on top of it.
Yeah.
You feel the cold wind, but you don't create a story about how the wind is ruining your day.
Vishnathan uses a visceral, almost shocking analogy to describe what it feels like when we finally achieve the state of non-abiding present awareness.
What's the analogy?
He asks us to imagine a magician whose body has been violently chopped into pieces and scattered across the landscape, an arm in the east, a leg in the north, the torso in the south.
That is a very graphic image, but it captures the phenomenology of anxiety perfectly.
Exactly. Thich Nhat Hanh says this is the default state of the modern human mind. We are violently scattered. A piece of our attention is trapped in the past, endlessly replaying a social misstep. Another piece is projected into the future, catastrophizing about a deadline.
We are dispersed across time and space, shredded by the four marks.
But the magician has a magic word. And when he utters that single word, all the disparate, bloody pieces of his body instantly fly back together and reassemble into a whole, living, breathing person.
And mindfulness is the magic word.
Mindfulness is the mechanism of reassembly. The moment you purposefully anchor your attention in the present moment, usually by returning to the breath or the physical sensations of the body, you instantly recall all those fragmented pieces of your psyche.
You pull your energy back from the hallucinated past and the hallucinated future, and you consolidate it entirely in the now. You snap out of the conceptual cages and arrive in reality. Let's run a simulation for you listening to show how wildly effective this is in daily life. Imagine you are at your corporate job. and you have to deliver a high-stakes presentation to the executive board.
Okay, stressful situation.
Very. Your promotion and potentially your job is on the line. If you walk into that boardroom operating under the standard protocol of the 4 marks, you are experiencing a state of psychological fragmentation. Your mark of self is terrified of looking incompetent. Your mark of person is analyzing the executives, deciding who is an ally and who is an enemy. Your mark of lifespan is projecting 5 years into the future, calculating how a failure today ruins your career trajectory.
Under those conditions, your nervous system is in a full fight-or-flight response. Your amygdala is hijacked. Your mental bandwidth is so consumed by defending the ego from phantom threats that you only have a fraction of your cognitive capacity available to actually deliver the information.
You are fighting a war in your head while trying to speak.
Exactly.
But if you apply the Diamond Sutra's principle of non-abiding, if you use mindfulness to pull your scattered pieces back to the present, the entire paradigm shifts. You don't become lazy or apathetic. You just give the presentation.
You pour 100% of your preparation, your intellect, and your vocal energy into the pure act of communicating the data.
You do the work, but you radically detach from the outcome. You drop the heavy luggage of, how will they judge me? And you just become the action of speaking.
You enter a flow state, and what people discover is that when you drop the ego's anxiety, your performance metrics actually skyrocket.
Because you're not distracted.
Right. You become infinitely more adaptable in the room because you aren't defending a rigid script. You are responsive, present, and clear. There is a beautiful phrase Master Nan references to describe this way of moving through the world. Deeds pass like a spring dream, leaving no trace.
Deeds pass like a spring dream, leaving no trace. I love that. You execute the presentation brilliantly, you answer the questions with total presence, and when you walk out of the room, it is over.
It is completely over.
You do not drag the psychological weight of that meeting into your evening. You don't replay it. You let it evaporate like a dream, and you arrive fully fresh for the next moment of your life.
That is the Bodhisattva's ambition realized in the mundane world. You do everything necessary to save the project, to help your team, to excel in your craft, but you carry absolutely no burden of, I am the hero who did this.
You use the raft of professional excellence, and then you leave in the boardroom.
Yes.
Wow. Let's synthesize this massive architectural blueprint of the mind we've explored today. We started with the ultimate paradox of the Bodhisattva, dedicating infinite energy to saving all life, holding the profound realization that at the level of ultimate reality, there is no localized self to save or be saved.
It is the practice of boundless compassionate action entirely stripped of the transactional ledger of the ego.
From there, we diagnosed the root pathology of our suffering by deconstructing the ultimate mental cage, the 4 marks. We saw how the illusion of a permanent self forces us to create the boundary of the person, which scales up to the tribalism of sentient beings and stretches across time as the desperate grasping of the lifespan.
This cage is the source of everything from our toxic workplace rivalries to our exhausting appearance anxiety.
Right. We brought in the historical genius of Master Xingzao to rescue us from the trap of nihilism. We learned that breaking the cage of the 4 marks does not plunge us into a dark, Taoist nothingness. Instead, it awakens us to emptiness, the breathtaking fullness of dependent origination.
We realize we are not isolated islands, but temporary, dynamic intersections of infinite cosmic conditions.
We navigated the danger of the raft, realizing through the Sutra's 3-stage logic that even the concept of emptiness, even our own spiritual practices, can become a new ego trap if we attach to them. The goal is non-abiding, not a new identity as an enlightened person.
And finally, Kabat-Zinn and Thich Nhat Hanh showed us the practical application. True freedom doesn't require us to escape society. The ultimate practice of the Diamond Sutra happens right in the middle of a chaotic Tuesday.
It is the act of speaking the magic word of mindfulness, gathering our scattered, anxious minds back to the present moment, and executing our daily tasks without the heavy, suffocating luggage of me and my success.
The Diamond Sutra is not merely an object of intellectual curiosity. It is a highly advanced operating system for the human mind, designed to optimize our capacity for compassion and joy by deleting the malware of the ego.
And so, to you listening, our challenge is simple. You don't need to change your external circumstances right now. You just need to change the cognitive gravity you apply to them. The next time you sit down to write an email or wash the dishes or comfort a friend, try doing it without checking the ledger. Just be the action.
Before we close out this deep dive, I want to leave you with a final lingering question to ponder. We have spent this entire hour analyzing the mechanics of dropping the self in order to find true peace. We've talked about erasing the ego to eliminate suffering. But consider this puzzle.
Okay.
When you successfully let go of your ego, your worries, your rigid identity, and you finally step out of the cage of the four marks, who or what is the one left experiencing that profound sense of relief? If the self is entirely gone, who is the one feeling the joy of liberation?
Oh, that is a beautifully destabilizing thought to leave on. If the cage is empty, who is singing? Thank you all for joining us on this rigorous expedition into the ancient wisdom and modern realities of the Diamond Sutra. We hope you carry this uncaged, non-abiding perspective into whatever moment you face next. And remember, the next time you find yourself obsessively tallying up your successes and failures on the ledger of life, maybe just try throwing the book away entirely. See you next time.